In a quiet university lecture hall, the air hummed with restless energy. Dozens of students leaned forward, watching their professor sketch a maze of numbers and symbols across the whiteboard. The markers squeaked, the lines grew, and soon the equation sprawled like a mystery. With a playful smirk, Professor Elaine Carter turned toward her class. She said, half-jokingly, "Solve this equation, and I'll marry you." Laughter erupted, light, carefree, the kind that fills spaces between ambition and youth. But in the back of the hall, unseen by most, a man paused mid-step. A janitor pushing his cart quietly down the aisle, his eyes fixed on the board. He smiled faintly, not at the joke, but at the numbers themselves. To him, they weren't chaos. They were familiar, like an old song. No one noticed when he lingered just a moment longer, gaze tracing the symbols that had stumped a class of scholars. No one imagined that the man with the mop would be the one to solve the unsolvable. Westwood University was known for its brilliance, home to future scientists, mathematicians, and dreamers, with Professor Elaine Carter at its heart, young yet already a legend. Her lectures were said to challenge the brightest minds, her humor sharp enough to humble even the most confident student. Among the many who crossed her path each day, one man passed almost invisibly, Marcus Reed, the janitor. Mid-40s, quiet, meticulous. His uniform was always spotless, his tools neatly arranged, his presence unassuming. Most students barely glanced his way. What they didn't know was that Marcus once lived a very different life. Decades earlier, he had been a mathematics prodigy, a scholarship student with papers published before graduation. But fate had a way of redrawing plans. Family illness, financial hardship, and the unrelenting weight of responsibility forced him to abandon academia and take whatever work he could find. Still, he never stopped loving the language of numbers. Every night after cleaning, he'd stand before the empty board, tracing equations left behind, studying patterns others had long since erased. He didn't solve them for recognition. He solved them because they spoke to something deep within him, the part that refused to fade. So when Professor Carter drew that impossible equation and made her joking promise, Marcus felt a spark he hadn't felt in years, a challenge worth meeting. Days passed, and the marriage equation, as students called it, became a running joke across campus. Groups huddled around notes and laptops trying to make sense of it. Every attempt ended the same way, failure. The problem was too complex, a puzzle that seemed to mock human intellect. But each night, long after the lights dimmed and the classrooms emptied, Marcus stayed behind. He'd roll his cart into the corner, pull a small notebook from his pocket, and start writing. His hands, rough from years of labor, moved with precision and care. The equation unfolded slowly, revealing symmetry others had missed, patterns that whispered possibilities. To Marcus, it wasn't a riddle. It was art. He saw balance where others saw chaos, beauty where others saw burden. Hours melted away as he lost himself in thought. One night, as he was midway through his work, Professor Carter returned to retrieve her forgotten tablet. She stopped in the doorway, surprised. The janitor she'd barely noticed was standing before her board, filling it with symbols that looked almost poetic. She watched quietly, realizing he wasn't guessing. He was reasoning, step by step, confident and calm. When Marcus noticed her reflection in the glass, he froze. His first instinct was apology, but she said nothing. She only stepped closer, reading his lines silently. With every number, her eyes widened. This wasn't a mistake. It was mastery. The next morning, she couldn't shake what she had seen. During class, she paused mid-lecture and looked at her students, so young, so sure they were the smartest in the room. For the first time, she wondered how many brilliant minds went unnoticed, simply because no one thought to ask their story. By the week's end, Professor Carter submitted the completed equation to the mathematics department, anonymously. She labeled it Independent Solution. Within days, the academic board called a meeting. Professors and doctoral candidates gathered, eyes narrowing at the neat handwriting and elegant logic. This, one of them whispered, is not only correct, it's revolutionary. When Carter revealed that the author was the janitor, silence fell like a heavy curtain. Some doubted her. Others were stunned. But truth has a way of cutting through disbelief. They invited Marcus to present his work. He arrived quietly, wearing the same uniform, holding his weathered notebook. As he stood before the whiteboard, the same equation that had once drawn laughter now filled the room with awe. He explained his process with humility, his voice steady, his reasoning clear. There was no pride in his tone, only peace. When he finished, no one clapped at first. They were too stunned. Then, as realization set in, applause filled the hall. Even those who once dismissed him rose to their feet. Professor Carter stood among them, tears in her eyes. The joke that began as lighthearted had become a moment of revelation, not just of intellect, but of humanity. For Marcus, it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about remembering who he was, reclaiming the part of himself that life had nearly silenced. Marcus's life didn't turn into a fairy tale. He didn't chase fame or fortune, nor did he seek to rewrite his story with grand gestures. Instead, he chose to remain at the university, the same halls where he once moved unseen. But now people greeted him by name. Students waved as he passed. The man who once blended into the background had become a quiet symbol of possibility. In the evenings, after his cleaning rounds, Marcus opened the door to what was once a maintenance closet. Inside, the scent of chalk mixed with that of old books and warm coffee. A small lamp glowed over a desk cluttered with notes and equations. That tiny room had transformed into something greater, a place of learning, laughter, and discovery. Students gathered there after hours, not for grades or credit, but for curiosity. They came to learn from the man who had shown that knowledge has no boundaries. Professor Carter often joined him, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a notebook, discussing math, philosophy, and life. She admired him deeply, not because he had solved the impossible, but because he had done so with humility and grace. Their friendship became a testament to mutual respect, a bond between two minds who loved the same truth in different ways. In time, the university honored him with an honorary degree and a scholarship to finish the studies he had left behind decades earlier. But Marcus always said the most significant reward wasn't the certificate or applause, it was being seen. Truly seen. On the door of his old closet, a bronze plaque now reads, "Marcus Reed, the man who solved the impossible equation." New students still stopped to read it, whispering his story in the halls. To them, it's more than a legend. It's a reminder that titles, uniforms, or paychecks don't define brilliance. Sometimes genius wears overalls. Sometimes it carries a mop before picking up the chalk. And as years pass, Professor Carter's words echo through her lectures. Never judge intelligence by appearance. The mind has no uniform. Because somewhere, in every hallway, in every classroom, there might be another Marcus, waiting for the world to look up and see beyond the surface finally,